You're listening to another episode of the Coaster101 podcast. I'm Andrew Stillwell, and I am joined by somebody who has been referred to as both one of the founding fathers and the uncool mom of Coaster101, John Stevenson. John, what's going on?
Oh, what's not going on is the better question to ask. All is good here, though.
That's good. I'm glad everything's good here as well. Yeah. I'm a little salty right now. If you listened to our show last week, you know that Eric and Nick, our other fellow Coaster101 riders, they got together with me. We had a little bit of a wooden coaster fantasy draft, and the results are in on twitter.com. And with 44% of the vote, which I can call for a recount because he didn't get a majority, Eric did capture the wooden coaster who had the best. I don't know if he fired up the bot accounts or what, but 44% of the vote. I came in second with 29%, and Nick finished in third at 27%. So thank you to everyone who listened and who voted. If you haven't listened yet, John, but yeah, give that episode a listen. It was a really fun one. You're looking to do more things like that in the future. But I want to start this week's show by talking about, I want to call it a very momentous occasion in the history of Coaster101, the 17-year history at this point, 17-plus year history. John, you were quoted last week in an article in the Wall Street Journal, which to me, as someone who grew up and still occasionally reads a newspaper, being quoted in the Wall Street Journal, pretty significant big deal. But can you talk a little bit about the article you were quoted in and kind of how that article kind of came to be? I know you were at Dollywood and you were noticing these signs, but what was that article about and what happened?
Yeah, so it started at Dollywood at the end of September. I noticed that outside of the entrance to Lightning Rod and Wild Eagle, which of course are the two more intense roller coasters at Dollywood, they had a signs that read, "Cell phones and other devices should not be brought aboard any attraction," of course. Then it says, "Due to the dynamic movement you will experience on this ride, Apple Watches and similar devices may activate their emergency call function. To prevent your device from making unintended 911 calls, please turn it off or enable airplane mode." And so it really kind of struck me as odd. I'm admittedly not an Apple Watch user. I've never had one. So that had never even crossed my mind. So I took a picture of it and tweeted it and got a lot of responses from people who were wearing Apple Watches, and the devices ended up calling 911 because of the movements of the ride. The device thinking that the user was in some sort of collision or traumatic event like that, car crash, what have you. And so people get off the ride and they see that their phone has called 911, and they're on the phone being like, "Hey, is everybody okay? Like, what's going on?" And they just got off of Lightning Rod or whatever coaster. And so people were responding all the different rides that this has happened on. And generally they're more, some of the more intense, the ones with more intense forces. So did that, was writing, was working on an article for the site. And then I got an email from a writer at the Wall Street Journal, Joanna Stern, asking to talk to me. And so she let me ramble on a phone call asking about this glitch or this thing that's been happening with these newer Apple Watches and iPhone 14, that this new collision detection feature. And so it's obviously a problem. It's gotten to the point where parks are having to put signs out. So trying to figure out, what is the solution, short-term solution, put your phone, either best case, just if it's your phone, your iPhone 14, leave that with a non-rider or in a locker. But if you have an Apple Watch, turning it on airplane mode. Again, I'm not an Apple Watch user, so I don't know exactly the functionalities of it, but it's a really interesting story, and I highly recommend. Go to Coaster101. We've got the story there as well. And if you're a subscriber to the Wall Street Journal, go and read Joanna's piece because she goes much more. It's the Wall Street Journal tech section, so it goes much more into kind of the technology behind it and trying to figure out, what is the more long-term solution that Apple can take. So I was honored, of course. Always cool to see Coaster101's name in the media, usually for good reasons. I think so far it's all been good. So so it was crazy. A sign at Dollywood led me to the Wall Street Journal.
I love it. And I had a picture. One of my pictures
was
used in the article. So,
yes,
Joanna, if you're listening, thank you for quoting John, but using my picture. John, sorry your Mystic Timbers photos weren't as good as mine for whatever reason. You're typically a much better photographer than I am, but it's all good.
No, I'm glad. I mean, it was just so cool to have our names in there and Coaster101. I mean, truly an honor. So.
Yeah, and I tried. I don't know if this made it in the physical paper or not. I know it was online back on October the 9th. But we, without being a subscriber to the Wall Street Journal and not somebody who consumes that regularly, obviously I know it's a very famous and well-established newspaper. I tried to find one that Sunday, and I don't know if the physical paper exists. I didn't know if I was looking in the wrong place or the right place. But in my small-ish suburban North Carolina town, I don't know where to find a Wall Street Journal. So I don't know if we were actually in the physical paper. If anybody's listening and has a copy of the October 9th Wall Street Journal, opens the text section, you see our names, let us know. Send us a tweet or an email, info@coaster101.com, or send us a tweet at coaster101. We'd love to see it. And if you're the Wall Street Journal and you've got extra papers laying around, let us know. And that'd be cool too. Yeah. But I want to talk a little bit real quick about a story, because your story in the Wall Street Journal, but also on Coaster101, kind of jogged my memory from a story earlier this summer. And I was at Adventureland in Long Island, and I was in line for Fireball, which was their new coaster. I didn't end up getting to ride it because of size, whatever. But I get this call from this local phone number in the Long Island area, whatever that county is. It said, so-and-so, Long Island, New York, whatever the city was. And so I was like, well, that's weird. I'm going to go ahead and answer it. Typically I would ignore it because it was probably a spam call. And I said, hello. And it was, yes, this is so-and-so from the whatever city, emergency services, 911. Is there an emergency? We got a call from your phone number. And I said, no, I definitely didn't do that. And I was, under the impression that, maybe my phone in my pocket, I had activated like the button with the screenshot where if you hold it down long enough, it'll bring up the emergency SOS and we'll call 911. But now I'm wondering if it was my Apple Watch on Turbulence, which is their, spinning roller coaster. And again, nothing of super speed, super height, super anything, but it was just the spinning and the physics that I'm wondering if it activated that call. So honestly, no way of knowing, but it is one of those things kind of jogged my memory that when the story came up, I was like, I wonder if that's a thing that happened. So yeah. It could be, couldn't be, but again, at the end of the day, it's cool we were quoted in the Wall Street Journal. But I do want to transition to kind of this week's topic of the show. And back last week, John, you kind of sometimes on Coaster101, when we don't have a lot to talk about, we kind of just throw open-ended questions into the void a little bit. And back on October 13th, you sent out a tweet from the Coaster101 account that said, what's a coaster that is overall not great, but has asterisks here, emphasis, one redeeming element or moment? And John, I want to really get into this tweet. We got a lot of really good responses, which we're going to talk about here on this week's show. Surprise, that's this week's topic, are these coasters with one redeeming element that are otherwise, decidedly average to good coasters. But when you tweeted this out, kind of what were you thinking? Kind of what was your rationale behind that tweet? Or was it just something that you're like, oh, we've never talked about this. Wonder what Twitter thinks?
Well, yeah, it was definitely kind of like a shower thought question, but the reason I asked it is because I couldn't think of one coaster that I could really fit into that category. I guess because in my mind, when I'm thinking of my favorite and my least favorite coasters, those are typically a little bit easier to name. I can tell you roller coasters that I do not like, I don't want to ride again, and then I can tell you ones that are top tier, my all time favorites. And so it was, and that's really why I tweeted it. And I obviously did not think it was going to kind of blow up like it did. But I really enjoyed reading through the responses, and a lot of them didn't agree with every single one of them, but it kind of jogged my memory a bit and was like, yeah, I can see that. So, yeah, I appreciate everyone's responses.
Yeah, I agree. And, there's some we're going to highlight here. I know that one that came up multiple times was Kenny Wood's Jackrabbit. Again, very classic roller coaster, over 100 years old at this point. Everyone said the same thing, is the double down is amazing, but the rest of the coaster is average, not great, not memorable. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's basically saying, if the double down didn't exist, and for those who don't know what we're talking about, it's not the KFC sandwich with the two chicken breasts as buns, but it's this element where you where you have you go down a hill, then you hit a little bit of a flat space, and then you go down another hill, so you go down twice, double down. And the way that Jackrabbit's restraints are, you're just in a seatbelt. You don't have any sort of ratcheting lap bar. You have a bar to hold on to in front of you, but you get a ton of airtime. And John, I know you and I have both been to Kennywood and experienced this, but I mean, do you kind of agree with this assessment that if the the double down on Jackrabbit didn't exist, people wouldn't think as highly of this coaster?
Yeah, I think so, and I think I mean for me its age is what beyond even if the double down if that was taken out of the equation, just that it's been in operation for over 100 years. I think for me is on its own makes it a memorable ride. But I agree. I mean it's that element is so memorable and is so unlike any that I've seen experienced on a roller coaster, especially not one at that age. Is yeah, if you took it out, I may not, I don't think it would be as coveted in the coaster community.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those. Again, the coaster was built or opened in 1921, and I would say that the United States was a lot less litigious and had a lot less guidelines, and I feel like this could be grandfathered into a lot of safety regulations. But that's they say they don't make them like they used to, and they truly don't. But I want to go through a couple more of these. I've got some that I'm thinking of here, but I want to go to the listeners here. And I'm going to start the legend from In the Loop. He came with the only memorable element on Raging Bull at one of your home away from home parks, John, Six Flags
Yeah.
Great America, is the first drop in the back row. So anything after the first drop, any other seat in the car, not memorable, but you have to be in the back row for this drop to hit. I mean, is there anything else when it comes to Raging Bull that you're just like, yeah, this is super memorable. Obviously, I know it's kind of got a really twisted layout compared to a lot of other B&M hypers, but is there anything else? I don't want to say redeeming because I don't feel like that feels like the right phrasing here, but is there anything else that kind of comes to mind on Raging Bull that is memorable for you?
Um, I love Raging Bull. I've always been a fan. I think it doesn't get the I think it's underrated. I know the trims are kind of the thing that I think turns a lot of people off to it. It was my first hyper coaster, so it's always held a special place in my heart. Yes, back row, first drop, amazing. Into the tunnel, you only have the clamshells, so it is very much it's one of those things. It's one of the few moments where I actually will typically kind of grab onto the restraint just out, reflex. I also love the drop out of the mid-course brake run. If you're in the back, that's generally good. Some good air there as well. I also really like the figure eight finale. I've always liked that. I like how close to the ground you are. It's very smooth, kind of swooping elements. Yeah, so to me, Raging Bull has never been kind of a one trick pony type of coaster, but I know I'm in the minority there. So I think Raging Bull got brought up several times in the comments, so I think that's definitely one that people see in that light.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, again, I've only ridden it, I think, once or twice. I don't remember how many times we rode it when we took our group trip, but that's the only time I've been to Six Flags Great America. I remember liking it a lot. It was probably my second or third favorite coaster at the park. So, legend. I mean, it's certainly a take you're allowed to have. Again, that's the point of this question. But, John might have just proved you wrong a little bit. Figure Eight finale sounds really fun. Another thing that came up a lot, though, and I saw this multiple times. It was just the coasters came in different names, but dive coasters. They say, after the drop, they're not that great. I'm in the minority, I feel like, sometimes as a coaster enthusiast. I like dive coasters a lot. I think they're super smooth. The drop is great, but I use Griffin at Busch Gardens Williamsburg as an example. That Immelman loop or dive loop or whatever it is, I never remember what's an Immelman and what's a dive loop. But the the first inversion on Griffin is just, you feel like you're flying, and it is so good.
Mm.
And that splashdown at the end, that is awesome. So I don't understand the hate for the dive coasters and how people just kind of think they're meh, just kind of average. I mean, do you have thoughts on dive coasters?
Yeah, I love them too. I love B&M just about anything, and I also think that I don't understand. I think they're generally overrated. Are they the best of the best? No, definitely not. But I agree. The Immelmans on dive coasters, the splashdowns, the width of the trains. If it's most of them are floorless. If you're sitting on one of the far edges, it they're just fun. I wish we had more of them. I'm glad. I think they're having a little bit of a renaissance, and I hope we start to see more, especially at Six Flags parks, because I've said on this podcast before, I would love a dive coaster at Six Flags Great America, and I will continue to speak that into the universe at any chance that I get.
I love it. Well, with this renaissance with
Yes.
Dr. Diabolical's really long coaster name that I don't remember everything else about it. Maybe you can will that into existence.
Yep.
So people at Six Flags, if you're listening, build dive coasters and also approve our use of Goliath in the Coaster 101 calendar. Thank you. I want to go to one now that I completely disagree with. And this is Jeff Wesson, who says the Big Apple coaster at New York Casino in Las Vegas. He notes that the second drop is awesome. The rest is meh. First of all, the entire ride is meh. Let's go on record. It is not a good ride. The trains, I never rode it in its pre-premiere rides, new trains that supposedly make the ride less rough. This coaster is rough. It was built by Togo. There's a reason there's not a lot of Togos left in the United States. I really think that Big Apple Coaster might be the only one. I rode this earlier this year. There were no redeeming qualities. I'm sorry, Jeff. I can't get behind this second drop. It was rough. It was painful. It hurt my back. I needed a chiropractor. It just was not a good coaster. So if you think it's redeeming, good for you. I have a hard time finding anything of walking through a casino with all these slot machines, finding my way to the arcade to ride this coaster, paying $18 to ride a roller coaster, and it's just not good. Thank you. This has been my thoughts on the Big Apple coaster at New York. But John, have you ever been out to Vegas and ridden this?
No, and I want to, just to say that I've ridden it. It's such an iconic coaster. It's like it's in almost every establishing shot, I feel like, in any time Las Vegas is shown on screen. So I know what to expect going in. So my expectations would be almost non-existent. So
okay, it's the TikTok sound.
I want the credit.
Yeah, I did too. And the TikTok sound is, I am ready to get hurt again. So, let's see what else is on this list. iRat, who is Iron Ratnum on Twitter, says, I hated Grizzly at King's Dominion, but I loved its drop. I think the first drop on Grizzly is good, but again, I kind of agree with Irat here that, yeah, it's other than that, you get some really good airtime on that first drop, and I think Grizzly gets a lot of unnecessary hate because everyone's like, wow, you should RMC that like you did Hurler, and then we'll get another Twisted Timbers. But I think Grizzly's fine, but the first drop is really good. John, I want to ask you because I know you've been out to the West Coast and ridden X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and our buddies over at Park Journey said the only redeeming quality of X2 is the first drop and only the first drop. Do you have a rebuttal?
I am not an X2 fan, and and rarely do I say this, but it was too much for me. And I think part of the problem I have with it is that I've ridden it twice, and both times I waited way longer than I should have. I believe over an hour. I was with Coaster101's Eric Woolley, and I don't know. It was too disorienting. I know I'm in the minority. I know I'm weak, but so for me, that whole ride is just one that I'd be totally fine not riding again. So the fire effects were cool. But yeah,
do they always work?
No, the first time they were, the second time they were not. So
this feels like an extremely on brand thing for the management company of that park, who will remain nameless, but there are Six Flags involved.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about, I want to step away from the Twitter timeline here. And I want to talk a little bit about two coasters that I kind of feel fit this bill a little bit. The first one is Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And it's like one moment that is really cool is actually not even on the coaster itself. It's taking the world's steepest staircase, I feel like, all the way down to that bridge that kind of connects the Scotland and Land of the Dragons area of Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and getting right below those interlocking loops, which make for a fantastic photo. And you're talking about Big Apple Coaster being in every Las Vegas setting the scene video. I feel like that's the case with Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and Loch Ness Monster. I think it's a very beautiful coaster. It runs very well for its age of 40 plus years at this point. It's got that helix in the cave, which is okay, I guess. But if you take away those interlocking loops and that kind of iconic moment, even if you put the loops in separate locations on the ride, I don't think that ride still exists today. I think without the interlocking loops, I think Loch Ness Monster is just not it's not a star at that park, and that's a park full of, star attractions for the most part. But also at that same park, and this is more of a general model type, but the only redeeming thing, in my opinion, of the premier ride Skyrocket 2 coaster, which is those multi-launch coasters, I feel like most of the Busch Gardens and SeaWorld parks have them. Tempesto, Tigris, Electric Eel. There's one at Lake Compounce now called Phobia Fear Coaster. There's a Superman at Six Flags, Discovery Kingdom. The only redeeming quality, the only thing that is a highlight for me about these is the second reverse launch, where you hit that, you go back through the station in reverse, you kind of go up this non-inverting loop, I think is the best way to call it, because it doesn't really go upside down. And depending on where you're sitting in the train, it's a different ride. But, you get up to the top, those rolls at the top, they're way too slow. And then the rest of the ride is you're over before it starts, it feels like. But that second launch where you head backwards up that hill, that to me it saves it. So, is there anything now, John, that you've kind of come to think of when like addressing this question on your end that we haven't talked about already? I've got to dig into a couple of more of these responses here because I think we can get into some good conversation, but I want to get your thoughts out of the way before I really get into those.
Yeah, and I was going through my list trying to, because like I said, I really asked this question because I none came to mind immediately, but I was looking through this, and this is a little controversial or maybe a little too soon. But the one that I did come to was Volcano, rest in peace, at King's Dominion, because I loved it. I was very fortunate. I got to ride it. I think maybe it's last year it was open, but it fun ride. But if you took away the volcano, the actual volcano that it erupted out of, I don't know if it would have been as loved as it was, and maybe I'm mistaken there. But the launch, of course, was fun. The first inversion was fun, but then after that, it kind of just moseying around. I know the last drop, like back toward the bottom of the station, was fun as well. But I think if you took the mountain away, I just don't think it would have gotten the same as much attention as it did.
I agree.
And I hate that it was law. I mean, I hate that it's no longer with us, but I do think that was kind of its saving grace, the actual volcano.
Yeah, I think that there was so much potential, I think, for Volcano. Obviously, you have that super fast launch. You have the bank turn where I feel like you're just almost purely flat, like around that 180-degree curve, and then you go straight into the volcano and go straight up, kind of invert. But then you just kind of slowly meander through those 3-0G rolls at the end, and then just when you think you're picking up speed, you hit that bank curve, that downward bank curve, right into the brake run. So it was a fun ride. I'm like you, I do miss it. Do I think what is going to be in that space eventually when King's Dominion, they've got a lot of real estate there. Something's going to happen. And whenever it does, it's going to be better than Volcano. You heard it here first. And I don't know anything, haven't heard anything, but it was a fun ride. Take away the mountain, it is just not good. I want to get some funnier responses here. Our good buddy Coaster Cuzzies, friend of the pod, he says the best thing about Steel Vengeance, the number 2 ranked steel coaster in the world, so loved by many people. He says the best thing about this is that it's by a lake, and I found that response hilarious. I actually laughed almost out loud, not really out loud, kind of like chuckled to myself, but I thought that was very funny. There was a response on here from, who was it? Somebody said something about Larson Loopers. And the redeeming thing was when they were over, which Larson Loopers aren't roller coasters. So you got us on a technicality there. But when they are over, it is fun. And then somebody else said the best thing about an SLC. I need to control F this one because this was just, I want to make sure I get this right. And of course, control F doesn't want to work. But it said, the exit button on the control panel of an SLC, I think is also very funny. But okay, we're really going to get into some controversy here, though. John, the response here, one of the last responses on this list, and I'm going to name this person because I want you to go after this person. This is Able Archer 83 on Twitter. He says, they say, I don't know if this is a he, but they say, a severely unpopular opinion, but Velocicoaster.
Oof.
Outside of the Mosasaurus roll, I just find it to be bland AF. John, as someone who just wrote a love letter to Velocicoaster, you went full Love Actually, complete with the cue cards. To me, you are perfect. To a roller coaster in Orlando, Florida. I would like your rebuttal to why Velocicoaster is not bland AF.
Oh, I would love to know what they think is not bland. Like, what do you consider spicy if you think Velocicoaster is bland? That's the first question. But yes, I rode Velocicoaster last month for the first time, and I could talk for an hour about it. It exceeded all my expectations. It was amazing. It was perfect. It was fun. I rode it over and over and over. Life changing. And I mean, and I'm admittedly a fan of Jurassic Park franchise, Jurassic World, so that was part of it. But if you took Velocicoaster out of Islands of Adventure, put it down in some random parking lot outside of somewhere in Southern California, no theming, no anything, it would still be amazing. I mean, the thematics, the scenery, the story, everything just adds to it. The ride on its own, start to finish, is amazing. I mean, is the first half is not quite as intense as the second half, of course, and it's not meant to be. I mean, that's what I love about it so much. Everything about that coaster is unconventional. It's not what you're expecting. It's the biggest element is halfway through the ride, and the roll at the end is, I mean, it's just the icing on the cake. I mean, it's a masterpiece. And yes, go read my love letter that I wrote. Thinking to myself, how do you write? I mean, everyone and their mother has written a review of Velocicoaster. So, how do you write something about it, about a coaster that's been reviewed so many? Of course, you write a love letter to it. Makes sense. But this one, I think there might be a subtle trolling there, but maybe not. Everyone's entitled to their wrong opinion.
All right. Speaking of wrong opinions, I'm going to defend one of my favorite coasters here. Karen Howren, she says the following about my favorite roller coaster, Fury 325. Fury 325, it's tall. That's it. I read this and I was having steam coming out of my ears like I was a cartoon character because it's tall. Yes, it is tall. It is the tallest roller coaster, traditional lift hill roller coaster of its kind, I believe, in the world still. Yes, that is a great thing. It is also fast. It is 95 miles an hour. It hauls during the summer months after those wheels have gotten some time to warm up. And if you like speed, it's right there. If you like forces, it's also right there because it is relentless from all 6,200 plus feet of track. Again, one of the longest steel roller coasters in the world. Definitely, it is the longest in North America, longest steel traditional roller coaster. Obviously, the Beast is longer. If you think the only redeeming quality of Fury is that it is tall, I want to talk to you about the entrance flyby and the hive dive and the treble clef turnaround and the 3 airtime hills following the hive dive, especially in that back row left seat. Oh my gosh, you want a love letter? I'm going to write a love letter to Fury 325 on this podcast right now. There is a reason, Karen. I respect your opinion. You are I'm 100% here for it. I don't know, again, if you were trying to troll us here. But if you think the only thing Fury has going for it is that it's tall, I am just sadly disagreeing with you. And I don't want to say you're mistaken. Everyone, again, entitled to their opinion. But there's so much more going on for Fury than just being tall.
I will say that Fury's not my all-time favorite. I love it. We've had this discussion before. I prefer I-305. Again, I know I'm in the minority there, but I will say I gained a lot of appreciation for Fury, and I haven't ridden Fury since 2019, I believe.
Right.
I gained a lot of appreciation for it after riding Leviathan at Canada's Wonderland because I realized it made me realize how long Fury really is. And I don't think because they are of comparable size, layouts, there's a little bit of similarity there. Both parks, both parks already had the more traditional B&M hypercoasters. And so they're definitely kind of cousins in that regard. And it really made me want to get back to Carowinds as soon as possible because I really think I'll have a new appreciation for it. And that the flyby, I mean, just it really is a work of art. How the pacing, the how everything is, the order of everything, how it interacts with the midway. I mean, it's just the entrance. It's fantastic. So I think if the height is the only redeeming quality of it, then I really have to ask, have you ridden it, or did you just see it from the interstate?
That's a fair point. Okay. We're going to calm down now. We're going to kind of go through a couple more of these, and then we're going to wrap this show up. So Futureport 82 says Rock and Roller Coaster's launch is excellent. I just hate the rest of the Vekoma headbanging. And that's a take I'll agree with. I think the theming and the story and the music on Rock and Roller Coaster is good, but I am not the biggest fan of those Vekoma spaghetti bowl type coasters. Rides like Flight of Fear at King's Dominion and Kings Island, or Joker's Jinx at Six Flags America, Poltergeist at Six Flags, Fiesta Texas is another one. I just am not the biggest fan of those types of rides, but I do agree that the launch is pretty exhilarating for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's one that I hadn't considered. And a lot of those, the ones that are indoors, like Flight of Fear, Kings Island. I mean, you definitely, even those, I think that indoor aspect kind of edges it up even a little bit more over the ones that are just outside, like Joker's Jinx and those. So yeah, I agreed with that one.
Yeah. On the subject of music, though, there's a couple of people who said Hollywood Rip Ride and Rocket. They didn't mention a specific thing, or they said the only redeeming quality was that you got to pick your own soundtrack. And it's been a few years since I've ridden this, and I will agree wholeheartedly that the music needed to be updated years ago and still needs to be updated. I know they put like a Blink-182 song in there this year that's like a secret track because they were performing at the park or something. So they have the ability to update and change the music. They just haven't. But I think when Rip Ride Rocket was installed, it was a different time at Universal. I don't think anything like this would ever be greenlit today because there's no IP other than music. The main gimmick behind it was the on-ride video, which I don't even know if they do anymore. I know a lot of parks have kind of done away with the on-ride roller coaster video. But I think the music is kind of the redeeming quality here. It's a very stunning, very beautiful roller coaster, especially at night as the lighted trains kind of climb up that vertical lift hill. But it is, other than the music, if you take away the music, I don't think this is as good of a roller coaster as, a lot of people make it out to be. And a lot of people hate this ride.
Yeah, I just rode it for the first time in 5 years when I was there last month. And it's not a bad ride. And I think some people took this as the original tweet as name an overrated coaster. And that really wasn't that. It was really one that's like, okay, what's a kind of average, not that great coaster with one specific element that really stands out and makes the ride memorable. So for me, I think there's a lot about Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket that is memorable. The non-inverting loop, of course, the choose your own soundtrack, the way that it interacts with the sets. It's a good layout. It's I like kind of that flyover element towards the end as it flies over the plaza there. But from an aesthetic point of view, I don't think the ride fits that well. I think it's not necessarily an eyesore, but to me, a studios park. I kind of like that it's that there aren't big rides towering over. To me, in a studios park, it's just more fitting for a lot of the attractions to be inside or low to the ground. That's just a personal preference, and I think that ride it just looks a little out of place. And seeing it now, the paint's kind of faded. It just doesn't fit, in my opinion. So if it were to close down the road, I would not make a special trip to the park to ride it like I did when Dueling Dragons Dragon Challenge closed 5 years ago, which is why I was there. Rest in peace. So
it's all good. A couple of people chimed in with the Beast, another coaster that we've both ridden. Their mentions were the Trim Shed, which I don't believe I know what that is, but also the Double Helix Finale. I have not ridden the Beast since it had 2 feet of length added to it this year. And when I rode it, I believe it was 2021. It it was a good ride. It had its moments. I do love that Helix, and I think I've understood that they've neutered the Helix a little bit, where you're not immediately gonna be thrown into the side of the car and bruise your ribs as the car flies into that tunnel where that Helix is. Um, it's tough. The Beast by all accounts, one of the world's greatest wooden roller coasters. But there is a lot of that ride that just kind of meanders quickly meanders. I think that's an oxymoron through the woods. And there's a lot of straightaways. There's, some hills, cool. But that Helix really is the star for me. And I saw you were shaking your head when I started bringing up the Beast. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I to me this would know. I mean, it's it's historic, it's iconic, it's legendary. It's and again, I haven't ridden it either since 2021, so I know there's been some changes. But for me, it's the night rides on the Beast. The Helix is amazing, but just the layout in general. I've never, and maybe it's because I rode it for the first time in 2012, believe, and so maybe if you rode it back in the good old days, it was better. So I don't have anything to compare it to, but I've always loved it. It's been one of my favorite wooden coaster rides. That first time I rode it at night, I just think I don't I've never understood the take that it's overrated. Personally, I love it. It's I am of the mindset, if you don't go to if you go to amusement park for a day or 2 days, especially more, and you don't have a bruise or two by the end of it, then you just weren't, you're not doing it right. That's just and especially with old wooden coasters, like they're going to rough you up a little bit. And that's always been, I guess that's been part of their charm, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's the best word, but I was really surprised to see this as in the replies.
Yes. And I want to mention just a couple more, and we will wrap this up. A couple of people mentioned Cheetah Hunt at Busch Gardens Tampa, and ironically enough, the two people who mentioned Cheetah Hunt mentioned different things, which to me was hilarious. The launch up to what they call the Wind Catcher Tower, which is kind of that figure eight element, that tower element. Very exciting. I love that element. And then somebody else mentioned the launch into the Airtime Hill, which I believe is right after the Windcatcher Tower. So that section of the ride is fantastic. I do like the kind of slow launch out of the station into that bank curve. That's also very fun. That 0G roll on the kind of the back stretch of the train or the back stretch of the track, also really fun. I do think it's funny that people bring up Cheetah Hunt, but bring up two entirely distinct elements. It just speaks to how well or how exciting these coasters are, and
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
different everybody's opinions on them can be.
Yeah, it's all subjective. At the end of the day,
it really is. The last two, I want to talk about what somebody referred to as the Hollywood Backlot Stunt Coaster, which somebody else came for them in the comments, said it's not called this, but Backlot Stunt Coaster, the only really good part for them is the launch into the Helix where you kind of gray out, which I'm not a huge fan of graying out, so I'm not there. I will say if all of the effects are on and working, and I know there's 3 different iterations of this coaster, King's Dominion, King's Island, and I believe Canada's Wonderland. If the effects are all on and working, it's awesome. That scene is so good. It's above and beyond a lot of regional park coaster moments for me. But I think this coaster it's got a moment where it's kind of got like a sideways airtime hill, which is pretty unique, kind of a cutback almost. I think there's a lot to like about those backlot stunt coasters, and especially that drop out of the billboard sign under the queue. That's another really fun moment for sure.
Yeah, I've always loved those coasters. They're just fun.
Yes. And speaking of fun, and this is one that I wholeheartedly agree with. This is the last one we're going to talk about here. Is Taylor Joe Fisher on Twitter says the ending of Adventure Express is the best one moment that just makes the ride. And I could not agree more. I think if you've never ridden Adventure Express, I'm not going to spoil it for you. It's been around for, dozens of years at this point, so you probably need to go ride it. But the ending of Adventure Express, the first time I rode this, I had no idea what was coming. And I left that ride with such a giant smile on my face just from that, what happened at the end. It is so, 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 so good. And again, not something you see in a lot of coasters today.
It's a just unexpected.
Yes.
Just, yeah. And it's definitely, if you want to be surprised, don't go watch any videos or anything, obviously.
Or if you don't want to be surprised, again, it's been open for dozens of years. There's a POV somewhere on YouTube. You can go.
Yeah, but you know what? I think there's something to say. Maybe this is another episode, but there are some parks when I go to, maybe they were kind of surprised and I didn't know I was going to be going, or just life gets in the way, and it's a park that I've never really paid a whole lot of attention to. For me, that was Dorney Park. And I think there's something to say about going in kind of blind, not doing a ton of research, not going and watching all the POVs before. If you have a park like that you're going to, it's kind of nice. I think it allows for some kind of fun surprises, and things aren't overhyped. Since your expectations, it's kind of like going into a movie without watching the trailer before. So if you haven't ridden Adventure Express and want to be surprised, then go ride it and enjoy.
And see what Taylor's talking about, because again, that ending, fantastic. Speaking of fantastic endings, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Coaster 101 podcast. Thanks to everyone who participated on Twitter and who always participates on Twitter and interacts with us on all forms of social media at Coaster 101, or visits our website, coaster101.com, to read the latest and greatest in news, reviews, interviews, and other words that end in EWS in the amusement and roller coaster and theme park industry. If you're listening to this show, we would really appreciate it if you went on to iTunes, went on to Spotify, gave us a rating. We like 5 stars, but any rating will help, because more people rating and reviewing the show means more people are listening and more people will be able to find us in the future. So we would really appreciate that. A huge thank you, as always, to Justin Mabry of J&M Music Design for our theme music. And John, I appreciate you hopping on with me. We're going to try and figure out the founding father, uncool mom, and how those two things work together.
Okay.
But again, that's another show for another time.
Yes.
We will talk to y'all again soon. See ya.